going to talk about the Association of African American Museums. Good afternoon,
Good
Ms. Stewart.
afternoon.
How are you?
Fine.
Great, great. Well, we want to thank you for agreeing to sit with us today and talk a little bit about your experiences in the museum field and, in particular, your experience with the association.
All right.
What we try to do is start off with just a little bit of background on our interviewees. Where were you born?
I was born here in Jacksonville, Florida. Actually, I was born at the site of now the Super Bowl, where the Super Bowl was held. Jesus, I forgot. I'm sorry. I was going to say, I was born in Jacksonville, Florida.
All right.
Sorry.
Were your parents from Jacksonville as well?
My mother and father were from Florida. Our roots are from the Kingsley Plantation, and so we were part of the slaves that settled outside of what is now Jacksonville proper, on a little island which is called New Berlin, which was right opposite the plantation. And so both my mother and father, my mother was a native of that island. My father was a native of Jacksonville, but my grandmother was the teacher that they had sent down when all of the islands were required to have a public school teacher. And so that's how my mother met my father.
I see. What was the education level of your parents?
My grandmother had finished high school, and that was what was required at the time for college. My mother finished the 9th grade. My father had finished high school, 12th grade.
And what were their occupations?
My mother was a beautician. My father was a fisherman. My father lived on the island, and he fished on the seas all his life.
Do you have any brothers and sisters?
No, I'm an only child.
An only child. I see. And so, did you go to grade school in Jacksonville? So
I attended grade school in Jacksonville, a private prep school called Ball and Avon, which was a black prep school, and Stanton High.
Where'd you attend college?
Claflin College, Orangeburg, South Carolina. And Edward Waters, I finished my degree here in Edward Waters in Jacksonville.
Both of those were African American institutions?
Both of them were HBC schools.
I see. When did you enter the museum field?
I entered the museum field in 1974. It was interesting. I had been in social work for about 15 years. But my love was always for history. My degree was in history. And my husband was in the Navy, and so we sort of moved from town to town. And the way I kept myself stable was to try to find as much as I could about the history of my people in that particular town. By the time I got to Rhode Island, I just fell in love with this 1st Rhode Island Regiment. And I was working for the Martin Luther King Center as director of their settlement house. And I used to take 2 of my work days, and I would spend my time in the library researching those black soldiers of the Revolutionary War. And I created a group that was called the Black Regiment in honor of those guys who died in the Revolutionary War. And they were performing around the country during the time of the bicentennial. But they were from my settlement house. And that's how I got into it. I was just so elated over what I could find out about blacks that I knew nobody else knew about, that I had gone through school and nobody told me about the regiment. They told me about the 54th. But to ownership of the country, to me, was just very, very important. And I had come out of that civil rights stuff. And I thought it was real important for our kids to know that. So I just got the bug, and I couldn't get it out. And one day I walked in and turned my keys over to the president of the board. I gave him a whole set of keys to the settlement house. I was at top pay in the settlement field. And I turned my keys over, And I went home and my husband said, "Are you crazy?" And I said, "No." He said, "We got two kids in college. You turn your keys over?" Um, and my husband quite never understood that. It later resulted in my marriage ended, really, with this whole thing. But I loved it, and I got a great deal of satisfaction out of it. I need to say that.
What museum institutions have you worked for over the years?
I founded the Rhode Island Black Heritage Society, which was a black historical society. And what we did in Rhode Island was to research every city, every town. You could call me from any place in the country, and I could tell you if your relatives had been in Rhode Island or if your roots were there. We thought it was important because Rhode Island was the major slave port where people came in, even though they went south. So because all the great slave uh, merchants had homes in Rhode Island, it was really important for us. So we had all these incredible slave logs and all that kind of stuff. So, and then we knew where they were buried, so that we formed this historical society. And what it did, and Rhode Island was small enough for us to put our arms around it and really be able to do thorough research. So that we formed the Rhode Island Black Heritage Society, and I was there 10 years. And then I left there and went to Philadelphia. Philadelphia is a unique piece in itself, in that Philadelphia was great because it was the first time I'd ever worked in urban history, real urban history, where people really cared about that history and they were really psyched up about it. I mean, you could have a book review, you could have an author, and the auditorium would be packed. People loved their history in Philly. And although under Mayor Rizzo they had built this first black museum in Philly, it really wasn't a museum, it was a temporary site. But the black community never knew that, and they fought to keep it alive. So I was there with them for 7 years, but I learned how to do urban history in Philadelphia, really learned how to do urban history with exhibitions and programmatic stuff and community stuff. I mean, it was exciting. History was alive and well all the time in Philly. I loved Philly. It was a great place.
Well, talk a little bit about the Rhode Island Historical Society before we go on to anything else. You founded that society, so tell me about the struggles to do that, the process of doing that.
It really wasn't. The interesting thing about this, and I think all of the early founders had this kind of niche. I took the skills that I had from social work, and I had been a very successful social work director with fundraising and building contacts and community support. I took those skills and took them to this historical society approach. I asked G. William Miller, before he became the treasurer for the country, who was head of Textron, if he would assist me. He asked me what did I need, and I said, I don't need anything to do this. All I need is a place to learn. I didn't want them to give me money. I wanted to learn how to do the business. So he hooked me up with the Rhode Island Historical Society. I worked for the Rhode Island Historical Society without pay for 2 years. I mean, without a dime. But what it was for me was an opportunity for me to learn the business. And I did. And Rhode Island Historical Society was interesting because I had this Al Clyburn who taught museology at University of Rhode Island. And he would walk me through anything that I need to do. They never coddled me at all. I'd have to do an exhibition. I'd have to work on an exhibition like they were working on it. If they were working on it, I worked on it. If they had a program, I was involved. And they never had money. That was the amazing thing. They never had money. So they were always finding ways to get somebody else to support their project. So I had already had some of that skill, and I could really just move fast with that. The Rhode Island Historical Society was a great learning experience for me. The other side of that, though, was that I realized that there were two worlds in this museum business. One that had a lot to do with the white community and how the Euro community felt about our history. And Al Kleiberg was constantly reminding me all the time, remember, they only care about their history. It's not about your history. You've got to make sure that it's your history, because I could do their history as good as I could do mine, but they couldn't do mine as good as I could do it. So that even when I thought I would stray a little bit and would go over to the European people, he would pull me back and say, now, think about what you're doing now. You're here to develop the Rhode Island Black Heritage Society, and you make sure you do that. And it sometimes got a little offended, because I thought he was trying to talk me out of it. But what he was teaching me to do was to balance and to make sure I was steady in terms of the African American. And he would say things like, I could use you forever, but you would never have the position that you would have if you were doing this for your own people. I could use you forever because you're good. You're good at what you do, but I could do it. You could do yours so much better. So I kind of resented it at first, but it really got through to me, and I took this organization, the Rhode Island Black Heritage Society, out of the Historical Society and dead in the heart of the ghetto of Providence. I was in the OIC building, and it was an interesting experiment because I was bringing the black community to my building over at Rhode Island Historical Society. When I moved to OIC, I was putting myself right in the heart of the neighborhood. The other interesting thing about this is I didn't ask anybody for any money for the Rhode Island Black Heritage Society until the black community supported it itself. That was a different kind of concept. I just felt that I couldn't go to another foundation and ask them to do anything for our organization when the black community was not interested in it. So I got 100 people in Rhode Island to agree to give me $1,000 apiece. And that was how I funded it. There was an older gentleman, Mr. Turville, who read about the work that I was doing in the papers. And he called me and said, I think I've got what you need. And he had been collecting on Rhode Island for about 50 years. And he turned his entire collection. So in almost immediately, I got a collection, I got support from my community, and I had the respect of the business community, plus the historical society was on my side. So it was like it just flowed together. And almost anything we would touch would turn. And we did a lot of good things. We erected the monument to the Rhode Island Black Regiment. We sent these kids all over the country. We did a lot of great stuff. We put together a way to take public forums into the community so that black people could have a chance now to tell their side of the story, and it was really exciting.
Mm-hmm. What was the black community's response to the society when it was moved out from under the other institution?
It was interesting. There were some people who said, "Oh, it'll never work because after all, you're leaving the white community." You know, the only reason these people were coming there. And then there were other people who admired us taking that step. And the people who admired us taking that step, for the most part, were not people who had traditionally supported. They weren't in that $1,000 group. They were the ordinary person who felt suddenly they had an opportunity. They could tell their story in this place. So they became supporters. So it was like, and they all gradually came back together, but it took a while.
Is the society still around?
The society still stands.
That's good. But Philly was a different experience.
Philly was the most exciting thing. That was my training ground. Philly was so exciting. Philly it just reeked of its history. You know, we were 2 blocks from Independence Hall, 3 blocks from Mother Bethel, uh, a block from the burial ground where they found all of those people some 10, 15 years ago who had been buried when they dug up for the expressway to come through, 95 to come through. We were in the seat of the original black community. That was a fact. Philly was a political place. I thought I was political in Rhode Island, but when I got to Philly, I saw what real black politics worked like. And it was a place of political power. My chairman of the board was the most powerful person in the city. And when he met with the mayor, he got what he wanted for his institution. But I also knew that the museum had to serve the board. And so politics was always involved in everything that we did in Philadelphia. But Philly was a great experience, great learning experience. Educational institutions, we were doing exciting things. We were doing things like the Larry Neal Show long before Smithsonian did its public program. We did the Larry Neal series. We were bringing in writers like Maya Angelou and James Baldwin, and I mean, every imaginable great writer in the 20th century, in the last half of the 20th century, graced the stages of the Afro-American, and we treated them like they were the people that they were. We bought them in a limousine there. The community came out long-standing when they came in town, and then we would have the program there, and then they would come to my home for dinner in the evening. It was just a different world, just a world of history and culture, and the people loved it.
How long did you stay at Philadelphia?
I stayed in Philly for 7 years. I wish I had never left Philly. I look back and Philly is no longer the museum that it once was. And I wonder if I had stayed, would it have been different?
And where did you go after Philly?
I left Philly to go to Motown. Motown was a real challenge. It was perhaps the greatest of all of my challenges. Because Motown was a family museum. I never worked in a family museum, certainly not a black family museum, but it was also the museum that had the music of my people. And it was a town, Detroit was a town that was called the Motor Town, based on Motown's music. And so there were a lot of things that I learned in Detroit about family collections and people. Detroit was a wonderful, wonderful city that never, and still is, that never got its due for what it really is. It is a wonderful black city. Perhaps the closest thing that I have witnessed to what Africa is, what Africa means to African people. It's a place where black people truly respect that sense of being black. I mean, it is. I had grown all my life. I had lived. When I went to Detroit, I was 60 years old. I don't ever remember being in a town where a whole hospital system, the best system, was run by black doctors. I don't ever remember being in a town where there were generations of black lawyers. I mean, and it was that kind of wealth that existed in Detroit. And it often got overlooked because of sporadic violence that occurred there. But Detroit was a wonderful city. I was there 2 years, but it was really one of the coldest places I've ever been in my life, too. I have to tell you that. And I was ready to leave. So I really was there to do the Motown exhibit, which was at the Henry Ford Museum, to restore the Motown Museum to what it was when Barry Gordy started it. And when it was over, I left.
Were you the first director at Motown?
Well, people often say that to me. But, Esther Gordy was the founder of that museum, and really it was technically the director. She never stopped being the director. She was always the director, and still is now.
Now, you mentioned having founded Rhode Island, and then you talked about Philly. Over the years, what specific positions have you held in the field?
I've always just been an director.
Always
Always a director. Always started at the top. The top wasn't always the top, like you would say. I mean, I think all of us in the beginning were directors when we started an organization, or if we had leadership skills, that kind of thing.
What are the museum institutions with which you are currently affiliated?
I'm with the Ritz now, the Ritz La Villa. I was on their board, and I'm now working with them. But I'm with the Ritz La Villa.
And Ritz La Villa is here in Jacksonville.
It's right here in Jacksonville. That's right. It is the historic site of where the Black Cowboy movies were shown years ago. But it's in the heart of the center, the gateway of the Black community. It's where the town began, the Black business district, and it really was kind of the signal of the opening of that way. Most of this community has been, that particular section of town has been removed by urban renewal. And so rebuilding that and bringing that status, having people understand what it meant to us as African Americans, is a whole different proposition and an enormous challenge.
And what's the nature of that affiliation with the Ritz?
I'm now working on an exhibition with them. It's called Crossing Color Lines. It really focuses on the struggle of African Americans to just be free. It really is remarkable the ways and the creations that they come up with to survive and stay in this place.
Well, let's turn to AAAM.
You didn't ask me about Kansas City.
Oh, that's right. Tell me about Kansas City. I forgot that you had moved on from Philly to Kansas City.
Well,
from Motown to Kansas City.
Yeah, I went to Kansas City, and Kansas City was the greatest piece that I've ever worked on. Kansas City was the one thing in my museum career. It was the one time that I worked where I had the money, I had the staff, and I had the people that it needed to put that project together. It was to build the building that now houses both the American Jazz Museum and the Negro Leagues Museum. It was to restore a theater, the Gym Theater, which was across the street, which was the old Black Theater. It was a 9-block area, and we were a pivotal part of the revitalization of that area. It was the American Jazz Museum, which really focused on the jazz history in this country, and we were the only one in the country that was a pure jazz museum. That's all we did. But the great thing about Kansas City is, it is seldom you go into a project and someone says to you, and the Mayor Cleaver said to me, I want you to open this museum. You got 2 years to do it. I'll find the dollars. You give me the best product. And I think we did. I think we did that. I think we also gave a group of musicians who had fought for 10 years against this museum being in existence. They had fought against it because they said there would never be a place for them. As a result, I created a club called the Blue Room in the museum, where they were the ones who were the performers in it. So musicians who could not often work in town got a chance to work in their club, in their neighborhood, on a regular basis, and they still do. So to me, that was a great piece. But the other side of that is, this was Charlie Parker's home. Most of the world only knows Charlie as his drug years. But Charlie's music was just unbelievable. And this is a place where people for generations will be able to hear his contributions and gifts to the world of jazz.
And how long did you stay in Kansas City? How long were you there?
7 years.
7 years.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So, and Kansas City is where you retired from, correct?
I retired from Kansas City.
Let's see. Well, let's move on to AAAM then. When you became president of the association, it was the AAMA.
Yes.
Right. So, who did you succeed as president of AAMA?
Barry Gaither. Barry Gaither. Although we were not incorporated, I was the first incorporated president. We were not incorporated. For years, we met with Dr. Burroughs and Dr. Wright. They would call us together in Chicago or Detroit, and we would simply go there. I wasn't a part of that early group. I came into it in 1977 when Mr. Turville found this group and said that he thought that I should go. And I came, and that's when I met John Kennard, Harry Robinson, Barry Gaither, Byron Russian, Dr. Burroughs. There were people from the people from Storefront Museum in New York. Can't remember all of their names. Alonzo Jennings. I mean, there were people from all over the country who would come there and just listen to Dr. Burroughs and Dr. Wright. And then I realized that I had a place. And what was good about it is they sort of wrapped their arms around you when you came to be supportive of whatever you were trying to do back in your home.
So you succeeded Barry. What year was that? When were you elected president?
I think I was elected in 1979. I think it was 79. And I was in office for 2 years, I think it was.
In '79, what was the status of the association as an organization?
Well, we had come to, it's really interesting because we had come to Providence to draw up our bylaws and form our organization. We really, Barry operated as the president, and he kind of managed things out of Boston. And all of us across the country, whatever he wanted us to do, we would do. So we would make appearances at AAM. We would meet with the Association of Negro History, and we would have present our agendas at that time. But we really wasn't an organization. We had very little money. We had gotten a little money from the Museum Act. John Kennard had been instrumental in getting that. And the museum gave Barry, I think it was maybe $18,000. And we were able to find somebody to help us. And we got various people to help us from time to time to do correspondence and that kind of thing. But we really wasn't much of an organization. But we were trying to put ourselves together. And Betty Thomas was at the association. And she in Washington at the Bethune organization. And she had been trying to do some things with us. And so she came to the meeting. But we met at Brown University at Churchill House. The Rights and Reasons group were the group that accommodated us. But we formed our bylaws. And we elected our first set of offices. And part of that was we had to get dollars so that we could hire us a secretary. Or not a secretary, but hire us a staff to run our office. And our goal was to move our office from New England and into Washington so we could be at the seat of where changes was going on in the museum world, and we would have some power. And that became one of the first things that I had to do.
And so that did happen. I mean, what year would that have been that it did move to Washington?
I want to say that we moved in the early 80s. I want to say around the first of the 80s, around either January or February 80s. We got a grant. I was very fortunate. I had good contacts on the Hill. And Joe Duffy was then head of the National Endowment, and I simply walked into his office and asked him for money for us to operate our office, and got it. And that we hired Joy Austin to run our office. And Betty Thomas gave her a space at the Bethune Archives. in Washington, and she was there for, I guess, maybe 6 or 7 months. But following that, we moved into AAM. This is something that most people don't realize. We were in AAM for almost 3 years. We had an office there. They were willing to allow us to live with them.
So you were president for 2 years. What would you say would have been some of the significant events that happened during your tenure? I assume that it would have been the move to D.C. and the establishment of the office.
The move to D.C. was one. The other one was to build a budget. I built the budget up to about $700,000. We had been able to get good training grants, where we could train our membership in interpretation. One of the things that I really wanted us to do was to incorporate scholars into our programs. My experience had been whenever there were really good, solid programs, scholarship was there. And I had worked very closely with the New England Coalition. Barry and I and Byron formed a group called the New England Coalition. And they were made up of nothing but scholars from the New England area. And we met once in the spring and once in the fall. And they were like our resident scholars for our projects. So I wanted to encourage our membership to get scholars aboard. So that was one of the things that we worked on, and that was to bring scholars in them. And we had great training sessions. We did one that was on the Low Country that was just unparalleled. We did it down at Penn Center. We taught people about it, and really worked. And we had some of the finest scholars in the field. But we had a lot of these sessions. But we had a good director. Joy was an excellent, excellent director. She could think of great ideas. We would apply for them, and we would get the funding, and we could do it.
What was the status of AAMA after you left the president's office? It was then set up with an office, with a staff, and what were some of the things that they were projecting to do, and what were they projecting to be as an organization?
And by the time that I left the office of AAM, we had our first big meeting in Chicago. Big meeting. We had determined our own that we were going to offer training, and we were very, very concerned about each and every one of our members. We developed a relationship with those young, budding organizations where they could call on us at any time, and we would serve as their consultants. If they had to go before City Council, we would go with them. If they had to go to NEH, we would go with them. If we went to National Endowment, we made sure that they knew that our membership needed support. We did the kind of earthy stuff and we tried to make sure they were solidly grounded, like they got their bylaws, they got their incorporation papers and their 501c3 thing, all the things they needed to do. We tried to make sure they did that. One of the things that was done under my watch was a survey. The survey was done under my watch. It was a grant that would not be fulfilled until after, but we got the survey grant. And it allowed Joy to visit every museum that existed in this country. And that was because we didn't know who was out there. Some people were in storefronts. Some people were in church basements. Some people were in homes. And we didn't know. And we needed to have a profile on that. Then we also did another program where we looked at our institutions' self-studies. We took 4 institutions in 4 different locations in the country and did an in-depth study of what their status was. So we could talk to foundations and say, this organization, we know our members need these programs. One of the things that happened, it didn't happen on my watch, it happened in later, but I was really very amazed when I heard AMA President Ellsworth Brown say to the AAM community that the African American Museums Association and their museums was the ones that were doing education programs better than any institutions in the country. You see, we didn't have large collections, but we had taught our people how to interpret what they had so that when they made these presentations, it was as if they had huge collections and they didn't have it. So, our contribution to that whole education system and museum world will probably be noted, hopefully. And if they don't know it, I think we ought to make sure they know it, they remember it.
That first meeting, did it take place in Washington or was it in another city? The first, you mentioned the meeting. You meant the annual,
That was in
conference
Chicago.
meeting.
It was in Chicago, and it was like a showdown. Really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It was a showdown because there's always been this kind of tension between the scholars and the museum people. The scholars sometimes felt that they knew more about us than we knew about ourselves. They had gotten funded through the National Endowment. I shouldn't say they. Betty Thomas got funded through the National Endowment for Humanities to do this major conference in Chicago on black museums, and not a single black museum was included. And we had been, because Joy was in the office, we didn't know anything about it. We weren't included in it. So I went to Washington, and I found out that they were going to do it, and I said that they couldn't do it. I told the National Endowment they could not do that. It had to be, we had to be in it, and we had to be involved. So they allowed us to do the conference, which became a real bone of contention, because these scholars had figured they knew exactly how we were supposed to. But it was the first showdown. We just stood our ground. And there were people like Dr. Wright. Oh, Dr. Wright was angry. He was truly upset over it. Dr. Burroughs. We planned it in Chicago, and Dr. Burroughs left us in Chicago. And so we were there alone in Chicago. But we stood our ground. We had about 400 people at that conference. It was just awesome. And we did our thing. But we let the world know that we could speak for black museums. And scholars would help us, but they would not run our organizations unless they were directors of those organizations. So it was interesting. But that was great. And actually that I have a poster coming in the hall down there. That's the one.
What year was that? What year was that conference?
I want to say it was maybe 81.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad you mentioned AAM. Let's broaden the conversation a little bit and talk a bit about the museum field. I mean, what was the status of the African American museum field when you were elected to office?
I think we had about 38 people who were connected with museums. Some of them were either on staff with museums or doing their own individual Black History thing. We weren't employed. John Kennard was at Smithsonian. Harry was at Bishop and doing his thing. Byron was doing the Meeting House, and Barry was doing Elmer Lewis's thing. So we were all trying to do our little individual history projects, but we were small in number when I first came on. But with the bicentennial, people started opening up and talking about this thing. And Haley helped us a lot, because when Alex Haley came out with his book, then people began to understand that everybody had a little bit of history that they could talk about. And so that and everybody wanted to do that. And the bicentennial, of course, made little money available in the communities, so that we were able to grow a little bit with that. In terms of the field itself, nobody supported Black museums. That's why Philadelphia was such a big thing. You know, here was a city who had put up $2 million to build a site. But nobody supported Black Museum. It was unheard of that you would even think that you would get money from a city or county to help you with your history. And the association was very, very powerful at that point, the Association of Negro History and Journal. And in Washington, they became like an umbrella to us. And I think it's really important to mention that, because I think we forget how powerful they were. They would have a gathering of all of these scholars, and largely the scholars would be Black scholars who would come from all over the country. And they allowed us to meet with them every time they had an annual meeting. Mr. Prysock would make sure that we had space. He would try, if he could, to see if he could get dollars so that we could come to those meetings. But they were very supportive. They were like our umbrella. We had a particular, I forgot his name. We had one guy from upstate, Mr. John from New York, who was, I can't think of his last name now. I'll think of it in a minute. I'm sorry. But he was served on the board.
You want to catch that?
I was trying to reach for so you wouldn't get the ring. What's John Harmon? So Mr. John Harmon was served on the board, and he had worked with Carter Woodson. I mean, can you imagine us having that kind of contact with somebody who had worked with Carter Woodson? He had been with Carter Woodson when he was doing the migrant study, and he had this little museum up in Rye, New York, and it was no more than a room. But Mr. Harmon made sure that whenever the association met, that they made sure that AAMA was on the agenda, and that we had a place within that conference, so that for years we met with them, and so that they were able to help us like that. But there were a lot of people who were helpful to us. The endowment people opened the door because, of course, they at that time were being challenged because they were not supporting Blacks things. And day by day, by the bicentennial, people were pulling things out of their closet about Blacks. Things they had not talked about before. Suddenly they wanted to talk about it because they wanted, when the history was written, that their person who was Black would be remembered. So there were white people suddenly talking about Black things. Thing that got me the most, though, I went to speak at a little school, and this teacher said, I wanted these children to hear you because, so many of these kids have no history. And it is so good for you to come and talk about history because they don't have any history. Not like our people have history. And I was so taken back with this because what I suddenly realized that with Haley had succeeded in proving to us that America was all rootless. It wasn't just.
Let me put it up there for you.
Sorry.
That's all right. Okay.
That America was a rootless community. And a lot of people felt that only Black people didn't have their history. And what Haley had done was simply be able to say to America, hey, all of us are rootless in a very special way. But those were the kinds of things that just and all of the Black museum professionals faced these things. I mean, we were going to schools where Black kids were scared to act like they're because they didn't know what we were going to say about them. They didn't know whether we were going to jump out with Sambo or whether we were going to jump out with slave papers, and they didn't know how to deal with it. I've gone to schools and spoken to schools where kids, you'd have to put your hand on the kid just to calm him down so he'd understand that you're not there to embarrass him. But there, and I think all black museums had that challenge. But one of the things that we did know was that every time we went to a church, or every time there was like this living ritual where black people simply knew that we were kind of special keepers of their story. They knew it. It's amazing that they don't support us more because they do know that we are really very special to them. I guess I didn't answer your question, did I?
I think you did. I think you did. Well, but how has the African American museum field evolved over time since you started?
Oh, I watch it grow every year. It has grown more and more. One of the amazing things to me is the amount of museum professionals we have. We have a lot of museum professionals now. I mean, we used to beg people to please go to school and get involved with the museum program. But now, I mean, I'm amazed. I think there's a difference in, because the museum professional of yesterday had the community that was built largely as a black community as its buffer. And now we get a lot of professionals who are black who may not have even experienced living in an African American community, growing up in an African American community, or even having religious communion within a black community. So they have enormous and different challenges. So it's a change in that way. What has changed is, and this is John Kennard's contribution to us, is the fact that Smithsonian has so many blacks. That is the most amazing thing when I look at major institutions and see blacks who work there. And I can remember when John was a lone voice at AMA. It would be 6 or 7 of us there. And he would stand up in every opening meeting and talk about the racism that existed with Smithsonian, that blacks only worked there if they were maintenance or guards. And I look at them now, and I see them there, and I look at Lonnie, and I realize that we've come a long ways in the field.
Well, what, in your opinion, has been the impact of AAAM on African American museums and the museum field in general?
AAM?
No, AAAM, the association. Right.
Well, I think that you can't look at AAM without looking at what AAMA did. I think it's a mistake to do that, because AAM, as it exists, has not proven itself yet. But AAMA proved that it was a need for these black museums. Black museums under AAMA challenged the federal government for us not being included in major exhibitions. This is often forgotten. We testified on Hill for that. We wanted to make sure that we were included in these major exhibits. They did it. Now, we lost the battle, because while we got into the museums, got into the exhibits, they didn't necessarily hire our people to do those exhibitions. So we failed in that sense, and they still have not done that. But we challenged that. We were on the firing line when IMS became a reality. We testified for it. We assumed at that time that we were going to get part of the goal. We were going to be part of the IMS help, that our institutions was really going to be helped through that. We didn't get the help we thought we were going to do. But AMA challenged it every time they would come up, and we didn't get it. And that was very, very important. AMA was very, very involved with the survival of expansion arts for many, many years. They would not have survived had it not been for AMA's people endorsing it. And it made it possible for a lot of organizations to get arts money that would not have gotten it. So in a sense, AMA really gave us, our pioneers, fought for the kinds of programs that would allow us to have some kind of equal parity, some kind, not necessarily all of it. It gave us a core group of professional scholars now who can really speak for this stuff and do the kinds of things that need to be done in terms of interpreting our past. Okay, it has challenges. It has real challenges, and this is a challenge of AAMA because now we have to go beyond what AAMA did and meet the new challenges, and there are new challenges because our people are going to traditional museums. Our people are supporting traditional museums, and they may not always support African American museums. So there are real challenges there. And there is an incredible need for training. The need for training is there. And unless AMA fight for that training for our people, they will not get it because they don't see the necessity of it. They've been able to get in the business without it. And so they don't see the necessity of it, although we know that they need it.
Well, let's talk a little bit about those challenges. What do you think are, aside from the ones that you've mentioned, the broader challenges for the association, both in terms of its relation to the field and the members in the field, and itself as an organization that is stabilized?
Well, I think the broadest challenge and the challenge that is training. That's the broadest one, and we have not been able, and we need to come up with a way to provide a training base for our professionals, for professionals, period, going into the field. There just has to be some basic requirements, and we have to do that. Because more and more I see professionals who are not familiar with understanding African American life, its community, or its experiences, and they are being asked to interpret that. And what we end up with is a group of interpreters who give us a kind of bland history, not the vibrancy of our culture. So that we have to make sure, I'd like to see us do more training and making sure that there are training guidelines established. I'd like also for us to I'd love to see us go back to quarterly or at least having 2 or 3 teach-ins on a weekend a year. There's no reason why AMA cannot do that. They have all the expertise within its membership, and they have member organizations who would be glad to host those kind of things. I'd like to see AMA do that. The funding problems that we have is a grave issue. We have not learned how to deal with the funding situation in this country. We really don't know fundraising, and we need to teach our people how to do that. We need to teach them how to do that. Some of us are good at it, and those that are good at it ought to help those that are not good at it. And that has to be, and somebody has to call that shot. Somebody has to say, Harry, tell us how you do this. How can you build a building and come out without a deficit? How can you do it in these times? And that's the kind of, how do you have a relationship with a church community that supports your organization? Tell me how you do that. And our people need to know that. That stuff needs to be passed on. Because more and more of these pioneers who could do that are going. I look at Dr. Burroughs. I learned how to do the political stuff with Dr. Burroughs. She was a master at it. I mean, Dr. Burroughs could go to Daly, and she was blacklisted and get anything that she needed in Chicago. She was the best at it. And Dr. Burroughs is no longer out there doing that kind of stuff like she was doing back in those days, but she certainly knew how to do it, and you wouldn't dare refuse her. But our people need to know how to do that kind of thing. But those are some of the challenges. And then the space is challenge. We've got to stop grabbing every space. Get the right space. Get a space that is appropriate, that offers us what we need: our conservation, our archives, the ability to exhibit and exhibit properly. We don't need to take everybody's old school.
You mentioned earlier that Joy, under your tenure as president, Joy conducted the survey, and I'm assuming that, has another survey been done since then? Or are we at the point in time now where we need to do another one?
I think a survey is a meaningful thing. I think a survey needs to be done. Yeah, I don't think they know what the organizations look like. That's why we did it, because we didn't know. We didn't know what people had. We didn't know how many people they had on staff. We didn't know how they were being funded. And a survey can help do that. A survey certainly can help do it. But the survey, I saw a later survey that was done after Joy's survey that only included a few. The survey needs to look at everyone. Every town now knows the value of having an African American museum. They know the value of it. They know it improves the quality of life. When they go to a company to sell a company to come to their town, it means something to say, I can offer your African American public such and such. So that we need to have those figures. We don't know those. We don't know them. Half of them we don't know. And some of them are not with us. We need to do a massive recruitment for just AAMA.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, maybe we could end on this note. Why don't you talk a little bit more about the museum here in Jacksonville and the reception of it by the African American community?
Our museum opened at the turn of the century. It is a museum that Jacksonville had a very rich African American business history. Most people don't know that Jacksonville has the largest black population, always has, for the state of Florida since the very beginning. It's a place where the Civil War ended, and blacks were able. Where the Ritzler Villa Museum is now located is the very place where the Civil War encampment was. So that and they built their town around that whole piece. The museum here seeks to pull that history together, to do it in a special way. What they're trying to do is to have people become more conscious of Jacksonville. Jacksonville is very unique. You know, this is the city that Thomas Fortune came out of. This is the city where James Weldon Johnson came out of. This is also the city where we elected more public officials than any city in the South up until the 20th century. And so it's a remarkable kind of history that is often ignored. And what the museum is trying to do is to bring it back into fruition by letting people know how important it was to the survival. The other thing is Jacksonville produced two of the millionaires that existed, the black millionaires that existed in this country, A.L. Lewis and Fortune. They also produced the Afro Life Insurance Company, which employed 450 people during the Depression. Think about that. So that we have a legacy that have to be interpreted, and the museum sees its role as doing that. It also has a dual part. It also has a performance role that tries to look at the relationship between Harlem and Jacksonville. And it's something that I really never thought about until fairly recently. But Jacksonville was called for a long time the Harlem of the South. And it was because a lot of the acts that performed in New York performed here in Jacksonville. Because Jacksonville had a nice club in the 40s that could seat 2,000 people, a black nightclub. So it had a different kind of history, and the museum is trying to put that together. It's a real challenge because the only thing that was saved from this site was the sign. Everything else had been destroyed via the urban renewal movement. It is in the right place, though. It's at the gateway of the community. It's where the community is being revived, and it has great potential.
Well, I know with your help, it's going to prosper.
Well, I'm pleased to be able to help, and I'm pleased that we have a director such as Carol Alexander, who really knows the political ins and outs of the city, which will help a lot.
Well, I want to thank you, Ms. Stewart, for giving us the time today to talk through all of these issues, and we really appreciate it. Hopefully we can do this again.
Thank you. I hope I got everything that you needed.
You did. You covered a whole lot. But of course, if we have a chance to do it again, it's always interesting